Mathias Bock and Adrian Stuart will introduce their Timesheets to agents. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for being here. My name is Mathias Bock, of the CEO and co-founder of Agentic. And with me here today is our founding engineer, Adrian Stuart, and we want to talk to you about timesheets and agents. And it's really very unlikely a place to think about agents when you think about timesheets, and especially in the legal context. Not clear. But I hope that you'll take away today why it's an interesting space to play with AI technology and how we're doing that. And in order to really describe why we're doing this and where to optimize, I need to illustrate the business model to you first. So I don't know if any lawyers are here in the room or if you know lawyers, but lawyers bill by the hour, and that has never really changed. They write timesheets and they do that entirely manually. So at the end of the day, they write down what they've done. Quite incredible. People spend about 30 minutes a day doing that on average. And really good timesheets are actually really hard because clients are quite demanding. If you're charging someone $1,000 an hour, they want to know what you did. And so it's become industry standard that you take about 6 minute increments in which you have to break down the work. So if you think about what you've done throughout the day, the emails that you've sent, the documents you've worked on, all these things, it takes a long time. And when you estimated this, when you do this for the industry as a whole, it's essentially $100 billion novel. If you think 30 minutes a day, it's a pretty conservative estimate for a firm that has 1,000 lawyers, and that's just insane amounts of time that people spend doing this. Even just throughout the year, 30 minutes a day, mathematically comes up to about 2 weeks. So people spend 2 weeks of their working life every year writing timesheets. It's just insane. And I've done it for 10 years. I hated it. It's terrible. Of course, when that probably comes to most difficult when you're very busy. So then maybe just not write down because I couldn't be bothered. I wrote this email on the weekend to have the I just don't want to try it on my laptop and all things. When you're short on time, also abbreviate, clients don't like it. They push back and say, well, I don't know. Charging me $2,000 for this, and it just says no disclosure agreement. How did you do it? Right? All of that process, all of that detail is false. So how are we going about solving that issue? First thing you need to know is the Netflix reality of Harvey Specter and court arguing and being very important. That's not what lawyers' lives are like. That was like that. I would still be a lawyer. It's not like that. It's much more like right. You sit in an office, you sit in front of a computer. That's basically most of the day. And we've done that research. We've asked partners and big firms around the globe, and that's the clear feedback. People spend the predominant part of their day on device. They work there, they have meetings, share calendars, they email, they message, they have calls, all of which is almost all of this, most of the IP. And of course, they don't even work in Agentic. There's a little bit of work that they do often, but my developers don't obviously use the word context, but there's context in those things, right? It's very rare that the messenger kitchen brings you a document that also to your desk. Like it's somehow arrived, like email, you created it, so this information we can harness and we should understand what's happening. So, and because people spend all of their time on the devices, and that's exactly the information we use. So we employ a combination of technologies. We have integration for Microsoft 365 suite. So we take information, we take information from that software suite and all kinds of signals and agents in that. You already understand what people doing, but it doesn't stop there. But we basically run screenshots. It's really interesting to go from Outlook, you send an email, or you receive an email. Those are things we can take from there, but understanding actually what's in that email and how was that process of creating that email. That's not information that can take from this integration. So we take that from the suite And we basically push that through a pipeline of computer vision, we OCR some of that text, we take that text together with images, which build context, feed that into our model, and as a base to compare similarity between the tasks, and through that allow our system to basically automatically create these time entries that people have been battling with ever since they can remember. What that does is it reduces that amount of time drastically to a few minutes a day versus half an hour. Of course, the accuracy is much higher, the quality is much higher, applies much less on an engineer there. Well, okay, we spend 2 hours, you charge me $2,000 for this, but now I know what you did because we can actually tell it. And how does that now all tie into agents and agentic infrastructure? And I want to give you this glimpse into the future. So if you think about it, if you have a whole group of professionals who day in and day out give a detailed account of what they have done, right? I can understand who did this, what did they do, how did they do it, where did they do it, why did they do it. And those are all information that we can basically impute the timesheet with, so we can give our clients, our customers, the thing that they need to build out their work to get paid. But we can also review this with much more detail and understanding what is actually coming in. And why that is really interesting is everybody's using these systems, and you're probably all using LLMs, ChatGPTs, and whatever else is you've got your hands on. On a company level, it seems to be that hasn't really had much of an impact yet. That's because essentially none of these tools are really embedded to workflows. And the thing about the workflows is actually really interesting because workflows are super unique to the organization. So somebody building workflow from the outside and bringing that into an organization, that doesn't really work. I've tried that in the past, and people get very frustrated with it because you have a whole bunch of experts coming in explaining to you how things should be, and it's like, yeah, okay, fine, we'll do it. But everybody already thinks it's never going to work. We're not going to do it that way, and the whole thing fails. And this is kind of the state of AI today, and I study is that my impression, our impression. And workflows also change, right? And if everybody uses the same tools, then the workflow seems to be that thing that is what differentiates your work from somebody else's work and your organization's product from another organization's product. So actually harnessing those workflows and protecting them is going to be a really interesting and valuable step forward. And now, how do we get to these workflows? Well, to understand for 1,000 people, what are they doing? How are they doing it? Where are they doing it? When are they doing it? And I multiply that by 1,000, that actually other pattern and partnerships, right? And this is, in the end, the exact big detail that's currently missing from every AI system that's out there. LLMs are getting this in legal context, earlier, how I talked about architecture. All of that is incredibly interesting, but that's a library. And the libraries in these systems, that's very interesting. But what is a known library is how do you do this? Why are we doing it this particular way? What's the sequence that we know this to work? And how is that different from something else? I mean, that's going to be the differentiating factor. That's where all of the systems are going to fail. And this is where we get our go through our next round as we're moving forward. And now we want to give you a little glimpse into how we're building. And Adrian's going to talk about that.
Hello, so my name is Adrian, and we are building our first products. So my background, originally I actually did computer science and artificial intelligence in the 1990s, a long time ago, and I moved on to a whole bunch of other stuff, working in the accounting sector, digital marketing, and during the pandemic I had nothing else to do, so I sort of relearned code. I ended up working at a couple of startups. Now I'm working for 2 labs. So basically I'm a junior developer. I have other roles within the company, but I'm working alongside a senior developer. So we've been using a mixture of Manus, which is some people have heard of, for doing research on the building, and core code for doing planning and then the actual coding itself. Again, we're a startup. There's only a few people in the company, but with the mixture of those tools, we've been able to produce code and functioning system incredibly quickly. One of the reasons we've been able to do that is we have a senior engineer who has put a lot of structure into the code that we're using. So he has been able to extremely strong typing, really strong data models, and systems that the AI is able to look at and build with. So at the moment, the workflow we're doing is I go do research, I then speak to core code, do all the planning, core writes the code, I check it to make sure it's okay, and then pass it on to the team felt that it is okay, and so it's back to me. With this, we have been reducing code in a matter of hours. It would take me at least days, at the very least, which is being quite effective. Okay, so here's an example of one piece of functionality that I'm in the process of building. We are gathering data on the screen to try and understand what the words are doing. But another option we have is gathering data from Microsoft 365. So we were able to plug into the Microsoft 365 API and get data out of that. There's a whole raft of things we need to be able to do this. We have to be able to connect to 365. We have to get user data. We have to get information about their time zones. Then we need to actually extract all the API data, calendar data, email data, Teams data, all that stuff. And then we also need to obviously write code that does all this. So we have 3 different repos for the system. We have a backend, we have an admin, and then we have an actual desktop app that does all the work for capturing the screenshots. So in the space of about 11 working days, again, I'm a junior developer here, really. We've been able to build out this whole system incredibly quickly. You have the thing there, the breakdown of the times, but took a few days to be able to integrate Microsoft 365 ecosystem, add users, deal with user deletion, addition, etc. And then another aspect of this is obviously we have the front end parts of this. And I am not a front end developer at all. I know nothing dark arts of front end development. We have a front end guy who has built, once again, really good structure for front end and built some properties which the AIs have been able to bring in context for that and produce code with one shot. To the point where I pretty much now am comfortable just saying, hey, Google, all this stuff, what comes back works. Again, for a small startup, this is pretty game changing. These are just 3 principles that I've seen that seems to make this work within the context of what we're doing. So first of all, strong structure. It helps having a senior developer. Our senior developers work in the corporate world for quite a long time, so he really knows what he's doing. But he put in all the structure to make sure that everything's incredibly well defined, our technically well defined, our models are very well defined, our code is incredibly modular. I think one aspect of that is that each file is quite small. So it pulls in context, we're not putting context with it, of course, that works very well. Secondly, strong types. Everything's Python traditionally wasn't particularly well typed. Now it can be, it's all typing in place, and that works incredibly well. And then the third part is just the research. Being able to use some of the deep research tools to be able to go up and find solutions quickly and reasonably accurately. I check a lot of things to make sure things are right, but the deep research tools, rather than spend a lot of time on Google. I imagine all of us have seen Google as worse and worse over the years. So actually, I'm going to do research just purely in Google. But with those three different principles in place, we are choosing production level code really, really quick. However, sometimes we make mistakes. So this is just one example where we made a pretty serious error. obviously there's little errors here and there. Most of the time, we run the code to check it. If it crashes, it fixes the bugs. But this was a logic error whereby the core code was storing some of the data locally. It worked fine on my computer. When I checked it, it worked fine. Everything was working great. I submit my pull request to the senior developer, and he immediately noticed one of the bits of data was getting stored locally. It was never going to work on our distributed systems across many servers. So when he picked up that error, I went back to try and get core code to go and fix the problem. It couldn't. Then I spent some time searching, trying to find a way of fixing the problem we had. It turns out that there is no examples of this particular issue in code online anywhere that I could write. So I got core code to write out a specification of the problem that we were having. I gave that to Manus, and I said, Manus, hey, please help this research to find solutions to this problem. And it came out with a solution from a random blog post where somebody was talking about this problem. It didn't supply any code, it did describe how we dealt with this issue. I then took that blog post, put it into core code, got it to come up with a solution in code, which was then implemented and worked flawlessly. And also passed the checks with my senior dev, which they'd be happy to do that. So the combination of deep research plus these coding models are super powerful, incredibly quick. Most of this is less than a day that actually took to sort out. Yeah, fine. So that's the development. Again, we're a small startup. We don't have a lot of people. Using these AI tools has allowed us to work pretty quickly. But within the system itself, we're using elements of AI as well. So there's 3 different points at which we're using these models. Firstly, for data extraction. So we're taking screenshots, and from screenshots, we need to be able to understand what the lawyers are actually doing. What piece of work that they're working with. So as we give the screenshot to the LLM, get a structured output. We'll need as well to see if we get a JSON output of all of the different data points within the screenshots, plus the context of that. So it understands if it's an email account that it's looking at, it understands if it's a web browser it's looking at. We can get that context as well, which also helps with making the data more useful. We still down the line. Secondly, we, as I said, need to find out sometimes what platform they're using. If they're using a web browser, we can tell it's a web browser. But then we also need to know whether they're using a WordPress system within the web browser, or they're using an email system, what it is. Again, we can give these screenshots to the LLM and it can return back to us what it is that they're doing. Sometimes, for example, if they're using a web browser, they might collapse the browser down a little bit. You can't see the full URL, but it can figure out it's Google email, it can figure out this Word document, etc. So pretty good. And then the third point is the actual descriptions of what the lawyers are doing. So these are, I'm not a lawyer, these are very structured descriptions of what the lawyer has been doing for that period of time. The LLMs are able to produce that description for us once we give them the context of all the things the lawyer is doing up to that point. So there's 3 different things we're using for extracting the data, understanding the apps that they're using, and the third part is writing these descriptions, what they're actually working on. So just give an example of one of these points. So the data extraction, take screenshots, give it to the LLM. We ask the LLM to do structured output of everything that's on screen within context. So the names that it sees, email addresses that it sees, other company names that it sees. And we're using those then to match up what that lawyer is doing with projects that lawyer may be working on. So we can match those 2 things together and we understand what project the lawyer is working on. Outside of that, the data then gets passed on to traditional company. So we are doing all the normal stuff, using databases, sound engineering techniques. We're essentially trying to limit the actual use of the AI to deal with only the structured, to deal with unstructured data. Everything that comes structured then just goes into traditional code. Make sure we don't crack. That isolation and separation of AI stuff from like traditional coding is how we've been able to build a pretty stable and reliable system. Seems to work well. It's a group size here.
Any questions?
Right, with demo. The time that's shows. So Mathias has been running demos a lot last month or so.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So not everything is just like in front of the screens, right? So what if you are looking at some documents, like paper documents, speaking to a client, having a lawyer meeting, talking on the phone with the court? Like none of these things are recorded, right? Like how do you track them?
So it turns out, once we actually did research, most of that stuff is now done on computer. So most of all the phone calls aren't really done on mobile anymore, they're done through Teams. So we can capture all the information from that. There's not really any paper documents anymore. Everything's email or internal file systems online as well. So it comes straight from that. They don't actually go to court much. I'm not a lawyer now, I don't know much about law stuff, but it turns out that, yeah, in states, they don't spend time in court. Pretty much everything, I think it was 90%. 90% now is in front of the license. So we can catch everything, of course, everything they do. But let's say that you work at home, right? So they're sending emails to their phone. We're able to plug into Microsoft 365, which is the cloud platform most use. We can still get that data. It's going to be slightly less high resolution, but you can still capture the data for us. So send emails, making calls. Wow.
So you have an option where just in case if it's not like electronic devices, you could just maybe manually
They'll give a manual
correctly.
but that should be
Minimal. Yeah, okay.
And as I was saying earlier, the word that I'm going to want to use is context. And because in the end, right, like that lawyer that's working on this paper document, there is a way how that paper document got to their desk, right? It originally probably arrived by email. They open it and they printed it, right? We know that they printed it. But then you're working on this document on your desk. While you're doing that, you're not doing anything on your computer. So that takes its idle. So I know that there was a document that you opened, that you printed, then you've been idle for an hour, and now you're manually entering change. And so that's context, right? Is that going to be 100% accurate? Absolutely not. Is that going to be maybe 80% accurate? Probably. Okay. And it's just on the phone point, most of the stuff is voice over IP, even below. It's actually really interesting to hear. Many of the law firms, of the big law firms, have basically entirely switched to Teams. So people are using Teams on their mobile devices. And the biggest interest from the law firm's perspective is just cost control because data plans are so much cheaper than the actual loading plans. So yeah, people place Teams calls from their phones, which is great across interest. Yeah.
So do you somehow transcribe or summarize that? No. Okay, that's private.
Next week. It's a coming feature. Yeah. And while Adrian was talking, I kind of did a little bit of the demo. So I've got a document which is a transaction I've worked on before, and it basically did perfectly what it's supposed to. So it's no longer sharing. Well, so you can show this week. We have to show the three numbers. Yeah, presenting. Oh, this. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. So I open the document and just basically, I mean, it's hard to simulate a review of the document, right? Because it's not taking an hour. But basically, kind of scrolling through, it's picking up on individual cues, and it created this time entry exactly as it's supposed to. So this was a termination agreement. This is a termination agreement for a business combination transaction, and it identified the document, and then it described the document. It booked the time entry into the right project, the right sub-project, which is termination, and that's exactly what Company wants. That's they don't have it themselves, right? Check now actually.
Texas. So thank you, Mr. Block and Mr. Stewart for the informative speech on the some future for him as advice to you.
There's still yeah, I know. I 100% show you the here. So I just typed an email to my co-founder, and it's going to probably still update again. But it recognized the email. It recognized that this is regarding the project, and booked it onto the right project. So the description isn't ready yet, but probably not a bit. Because we're processing not every second, but it gets to that, right? So yeah, that's basically how it works.
Yeah, so we try and update this as we go, because obviously as we get more understanding about what's going on, we can write better solutions.
Thank you.